Hey guys, this is Daniel Dr. D. I apologize for these sunglasses. I have a little bit of an eye infection, and unfortunately, it's not pretty to look at. So I'm wearing these sunglasses so as not to distract you with that. It's been a long time since I posted that last review, and I apologize. This has taken so long, but it has been the craziest month, and it's been nearly that amount of time since the last review. And a lot of you people I know were curious about how this endeavor with the horn and the new Forte has been coming along. But I will just tell you what's been going on. I had new windows installed with UV protection. They're much more solid. They preserve energy far better. And we had new electricity, new insulation, new doors. Yeah, it's just been crazy. And we've had workers in here. I'm going to show you a little bit of footage with that. And that has been distracting because I've been working on this Forte cabinet. And I got to tell you, the Morris at Shinjitsu Audio came out with a video just like a week ago, and it really sealed the concept that I was coming up with myself, discovering myself about his horn versus the JBL horn. And I found out that the JBL horn worked good for certain things, but not others. And it's great. I have the horns here. But I would just tell you the tonality of that horn is not as sweet as the Shinjitsu horn. So I found myself going back to the Shinjitsu horn. And all these experiments and everything have taken place over the course of a month or so, and it takes time to develop this speaker and work with these different horns. People talk about tube rolling, and one of my audiophile buddies had made a joke to me about doing horn rolling or speaker rolling, and I've been doing that for the past month, and sometimes it takes time to figure these things out. Now, Morris over at Shinjitsu Audio, he has far vast experience compared to what I do. I mean, he does this for a living, whereas I do this as a, something I enjoy, but I'm certainly by no means a professional at it like Morris is. So I found myself loving that Shinjitsu horn, but here's the beauty of the Shinjitsu. It is a modular system. You can transfer it to open baffle. You can transfer it from the Heresy like I've done to the Forte like I did. And you can work with these different speakers using that horn. And that horn is only like $60 each one. So it's not like a terrible expense to just change out horns. Not a big deal. And if you have a Shinjitsu horn or you have one in order, the horn that Morris provides with it is really beautiful, that horn 2+2. And I love it. I think it was one of the greatest purchases I ever made. In fact, now that I've finalized doing all my testing and comparisons, I've now gotten the Forte to a point where I'm now ready to sell the regular Forte 1, which I've been using as kind of a reference in order to gauge the sound of the new Forte. Now, I don't have experience with measurements or anything like that, and I'm not an engineer. And I know you don't have to be an engineer to do measurements, but I was doing everything based on my listening experiences, which meant that I had to remove the port that I originally made for the Forte. Let me tell you, the Forte, that is the most complicated cabinet imaginable to me. Now that I know what to do, it's easier. But experimenting with it was an absolute nightmare. And when Klipsch developed that speaker, man, it is just unlike any other kind of speaker, because when you're working with a passive radiator and a port, they are just night and day different in my experience. The port turned out to be absolutely deplorable. I'm going to show you video footage of that assembly with the Forte, all the woodworking and everything. I'm going to talk a little bit about woodworking. I'm going to walk you guys through some of that, just so you know. I'm very experienced in woodworking. I've been doing it nearly my whole life. My father was a contractor, taught me pretty much everything I know, and I'll walk you through some of that. But I determined that the port on you see the Heresy, when I did the Heresy, it worked beautifully. It's just like one of those things where it's just by chance of luck. I put a Bama driver in there, the 12BR70 driver in there, and it just happened to work. But the Forte did not transfer the same way. And I put it in there, I put the port in. It was an utter disaster. It sounded muffled. I was like, what? I put the insulation in. It was just horrible. And I was like, I had to go back to the drawing board. Now think about this. All this during the time I had construction workers in here doing all the work, and it's been crazy. And that Forte, man, finally, now that it's done, I'm just absolutely in love with it. And it delivers really good deep bass, chest pounding bass, very fast, tight bass. And it takes nice high volumes if needed. It can rock out. The whole upper range is just opened up, like unlike the Forte. And I kind of find myself in a position where I find the regular Forte, it's good. It's got a sweet, pretty sound to it. But for jazz, it's just lacking that upper end. And if you listen to any reviews, like in particular the Altec Model 19s, or if you look at the multi-audio, the Vittora, or if you look at the Klipsch La Scala, and you listen to any audiophiles that talk about those horn speakers, they talk about how that upper mid-range is so beautiful. I think, when I look at the expense of this DIY, I mean, this Forte, I'm basically into it, retail price for about $2,100. And I think it sounds outstanding. Bob loves it so much that he's actually contemplating what he's going to do next, with this whole thing, because it's kind of flipped us both and around, And I just love the sound of horns. I like jazz, I like blues, and horns are just where it's at. Now, there's a couple of guys on a channel, I'm going to put a link in it below, called the Chicago Horn Guys. And I would highly recommend you look at this channel. These guys are really into just horns. They're not like, they're hobbyists, but they're not like salespeople. And I'm not interested in getting into the sales. I know I review a lot of stuff on the channel, but I'm just not interested in getting into this endeavor about reviewing stuff and, companies shipping this stuff. And, come on. It's just not, I'm not doing this for monetary reasons. It's just something I do because I'm passionate about it. I enjoy it. It's fun. I've made tons of mistakes like I did with the Forte. Oh man, the Forte, what a disaster. I mean, it came out nice, but I had to remove the port. I had to get a passive radiator from Dayton Audio. There's very few 12-inch passive. Go online and Google it and look for yourself. You will find hardly anything as far as having a 12-inch passive radiator. I went through hoops and bounds to try and figure this one out. And you can't just mix passive radiators with any drive. It just doesn't work that way. I was doing this little experiment where I was like pushing one side of the woofer on the Forte and watching what the passive radiator did on the other side. And if you don't have, drivers that work perfectly in unison, you'll get this thing where one driver's moving fast and the other one can't keep up with it, and it's just out of sync. I'm just like, oh man, this is more complicated than I thought. So hats off to the guys that did the Klipsch Forte, because that is a genius of a speaker. And I really like the Forte. It takes up very little real estate. I mean, it's actually takes up, I think, less real estate than a Heresy does. It's just taller. But it is a small speaker as far as real estate is concerned. And it sounds fantastic, man. I mean, we're talking like big soundstage, monstrous soundstage with this thing now. So I'm going to walk you through everything. Thanks for chiming in. I want to thank you guys for, your advice, your input. I appreciate each and every one of your input. We've had a few negative ones. That's fine. I invite people, if you have criticisms, please, by all means, criticize. Try to be constructive. That's all. But I like to keep that stuff there so others can learn from these comments and everything. And I'm going to walk you guys through everything going on. And let's go. All right, so here we have the Magnepan LRS Plus from left to right here, the Forte 1, the DIY Forte I did, and the Heresy, which I rotated upside down, worked at the original cabinet. As I stated before, the Heresy was, all of these were complicated at first, but the heresy just fell into place but naturally. And the Forte was just such a nightmare to do, as I stated before. And you can see that I ended up with the passive radiator on the back, 12-inch by Dayton Audio. I think that passive woofer is like $39. I checked the stats on it, and it was compatible with the Bama driver that I have, the 12BR70. And I used the port for the heresy. And as I wanted to preserve the originality of the heresy, and the original heresy actually sounds good with the port. The port was just an utter disaster on the Forte. It just didn't work. Now, you do see the JBL horn on the DIY Forte. That JBL horn is not being used with the Forte because it doesn't work as well as the Shinjitsu. And I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but it just does not seem to work with the Forte, and it could be because of the shallow depth of that cabinet. I don't know. And I did like the bass that was coming from the original Forte, and that was why I wanted to model the new Bama driver with the plan with the passive radiator on the Forte, so that it would just have that similar bass that the original Forte had, which is quite satisfying. In fact, if you look at the Klipsch Heritage line, the Forte, this particular Forte 1 has the deepest bass of any of the Heritage line, more than the Cornwall, more than this. This Forte that I have has deeper bass than any of the Heritage speakers, I believe. And it's quite remarkable. And for such a small footprint, it puts out just a massive soundstage. And even the little Heresy puts out really fantastic bass. It is tighter and cleaner than the original Forte, no doubt. This here is the 3/4 inch A1 Sapelli plywood I got. You'll notice there's about 1/8 of an inch of MDF under the veneer on each side of it. And there was a gentleman, I'm going to link in the description below, who did a comparison with different woods and found out there was very little in cabinet resonance between the different plywoods that he used, like solid MDF, apple ply, birch ply, etc. Where the differences came were when he started to use different installations. That's where his measurements started to come out really different. Now, I'm not saying that wood doesn't have different properties as far as resonances are concerned. I'm just saying in the context of this particular project, the differences of the wood wouldn't have made that much of a difference. Now, I know that people that build guitars, I have a friend that designs guitars, and he will tell you woods definitely make a difference. And I have worked with woods. And I have no doubt there are acoustical properties that can sometimes alter the tonality or sound of the cabinet itself. But I think in the context of this particular project, I don't think that using a solid piece of MDF would have made all that much of a difference. Now, I went down to a wood supplier that's near me and had him cut the pieces to size the way I wanted them. And that would just make it easier for me to just fit them in the car and just bring them home. And then I would have to do all the the corners and the 45-degree angles to miter the corners, put them all together. Now, I had some leftover scrap pieces that I experimented with. I ended up going with the dark stain to match the Shinjitsu 2+2 horn. The one on the right that you see is just the natural finish, which I actually like better. And I probably would have just gone that route had I known it would look that beautiful with the Sapelli. This is here on the 45-degree angles I was telling you about. And the reason I do this is in order to have more surface area to glue from. These boxes are not stapled or nailed or screwed together. They are strictly made with Type Bond wood glue. And when you do a 45-degree angle, you have a lot of surface area, about 1.5 inches of surface area to glue with. And so you get these really strong boxes that just will not come apart. I used to build cabinets and for the telescope industry, for telescopes and boxes for eyepieces and stuff like that in my industry. And as I stated, it was just easier to pay the guys $20, make the wood exactly to the cuts that I wanted, and the grains would all match all the way around. And I'll discuss that in a little bit. This is the 45-degree angles, as you can see here. And that's pretty much that. Now, this here is a $40 circle cutter router system that I got on Amazon $40. What can what can you say? I mean, it doesn't have any precise like measurement device that it comes with. You have to work with it and, kind of jig it. I did a little practice sheet here just to get the exact measurements here. You have to be careful when you're doing this kind of stuff. You got to remember, I'm not using a CNC machine shop like some multi-million-dollar company that have access to all that kind of stuff. And so this is kind of a one-time deal. And, for the cost that the thing it was fantastic. And you just kind of work your way around. You only dig down about 1/8 of an inch and just keep going and going and going until you eventually get through the wood. But you never want to go try to take it all in one bite. That is something that you want to do with like a CNC machine or something. That's a, professional grade, equipment. And here I just, giving an example. And then what I would do is just make a cut, check the measurement just to make sure it's precise. Now, it takes time to really get the jig exactly the way you want it so that you don't make any mistakes. You got to measure twice, cut once, that philosophy. And I was experimenting with it here. And it took a long time just to make these cuts because this is kind of a one-off system. It's not like a routine thing that I'm going to keep doing over and over and over. So that's why it ended up that way. Hole came out pretty good. It was fairly clean and required a bit of sanding. And then I went ahead and did it on the actual piece, which I cut before assembling the actual cabinet itself. And I was pretty pleased with the way the router worked out for it. And then after I was done, I took it into the house, popped the Bama driver in there just to check it out and see how it would do. And it fit in pretty nicely, as you can see here. And I didn't want to go too deep on it because you don't want the area that you're screwing into, you don't want it to be too thin. Otherwise, you got to add more wood to the inside. And it wasn't necessary to do all that. This here is the port, which ended up being removed. I ended up, after it was all assembled, I ended up cutting that port out. Now, this is an excessive amount of tape. If you look at some of the videos that Klipsch does, he uses clear tape. And I think probably the reason they do it is so they can see if the glue seeps out. You always want to be careful when you're taping with type bond glue. This stuff is like epoxy. It is really strong. I've been using it for years. I don't use anything else. The blue tape I like is it comes on and off real easily. And you have one chance to do this right. And you got to put it all together real fast. Glue all the sides. Put it up there. The back is just some leftover 3/4 inch oak that I had. And that was all going to get covered with some paint anyway, so it didn't matter. The reason you see these water stains here is because when you sand it down, you want to make sure that glue is still not there, and you're going to have to take water with cloth and rub it over it to make sure the glue is not there, because it can trick you. It can be there and you wouldn't even know it. And I think overall it came out okay. I put wood putty in here. You have to be very careful with wood putty when you buy wood putty. They have some that have like these oils in them that go deep into the wood that you can't sand out. This stuff worked flawlessly. And if you guys have questions about that, I can provide you the information if it's of interest to anybody. You have to be very careful when you're working with this stuff. I built the corners up. So, if there's any little flaws in there, you want to put that putty in there and just sand it down. Doing woodwork when you're first doing it, it can be kind of complicated for some people, and you have to be careful not to penetrate through the veneer, and you have to be, it's real easy to do it. The veneer is very thin, so you have to be very careful with it. Overall, all the grains were matched perfectly all the way around the tops. It's one of the things that people that build cabinets pay attention to, particularly speaker cabinets. The one thing is that when you look at the grains, they sometimes appear like they don't match. And the reason for that is due to the lighting, because you're looking at it at a certain angle one way against the light versus another. And so it gives you the impression that the grains don't match when in fact they do. But I can assure you the grains do match. It doesn't appear that way on this video sometimes because of the way the light is angled with it. So then I took it outside, just give her an overall look, just make sure everything worked out okay, and just to inspect it. And then I did the secondary cabinet and just went at that. I put fewer pieces of tape on there. I had a lot of tape originally on the bottom because you want to make sure that the pressure doesn't push down and spread the wood apart. And I would have a different system if I was doing this, multiple times. I'd have a whole jig set up to do all this stuff. But this is just a one-off prototype speaker that just happened to come out really good in the end when it was all said and done. So I was really happy with that. After the cabinet was all done, I went ahead and experimented with the 1-inch foam. I put the foam inside throughout. And it turned out in the end that the foam just did not work. This is just a sound test. This is uninsulated, this cabinet here. Testing 1, 2, testing. Testing 1, 2, testing. And then into the insulated cabinet. Testing 1, 2, testing. Testing 1, 2. So obviously there you could hear a difference. Now there's the foam finally all cut, everything put in there. Incredibly, at the very end, I ended up not using any of the foam. The design just did not call for it. And the reason I did it was because it was so successful in the Heresy, unlike the Forte. For reasons unknown to me, I'm not an engineer, the foam just did not work with the cabinet in the end. And I ended up having to make a special baffle for the cabinet eventually, which I'll show you here afterwards. But I put everything together, put the stains on, experimented with the stains. And, stain can be complicated sometimes, only in the sense that you're not going to know for sure how many coats you're going to want to apply at first. You're going to have to experiment with it. So I went over first coat and then a second coat. Here I was just kind of pointing out the grains, how they sometimes appear like they don't match. But again, that is due to the sunlight. And if you hold it at another angle, you'll see that the grains actually do match, just depends. And even here, it's kind of hard to tell, but you can start to see it come forward there. And it's just grains are crazy. It's like these fairways when they use the lawn mowers. You've seen them in golfing fairways. It just looks like crisscrosses, depending on the angle of the grass against the sun. The back and the bottom are all black with Exolite. It's basically like a black paint, but it's got a very thick viscosity to it. It's all water-based, and it comes from Parts Express. I think it was like $25 for a quart. I recommend it. It worked pretty well. The cabinets, after they were stained, I took them out in the sunlight to give them another inspection, just looked at how deep the color tone was. Obviously, it looks lighter when it's outside. Again, the foam would eventually end up being removed. And overall, I was very pleased with it and happy with the way the corners and everything came out, pretty much flawless. And I like cabinets like that. It's better to do 45-degree angles than just taking 3/4-inch wood and lapping it on top of each other because you got more surface area. I do know on some CNC machines that they actually put grooves in there so they all fit together like a puzzle. But when you're doing everything by hand, you don't have access to that kind of machinery, or then it's a lot harder to do it the way I did it. But again, this is just a prototype one-off. It's not like I'm doing this over and over. And I got some speaker posts and some feet for legs for it, so that came out pretty nice. This here was just the horn, the JBL horn with the Shinjitsu put on top, just to see how everything fit on and looked. And this here were just the binding, the posts for the cables for the left and right on the negative and positive on the woofer itself. And I made a couple of minor alterations, but overall came out pretty decent. So I was pretty happy with that. In the end, I put it all together, took it into the living room, and started to experiment with it. And that was when I started to notice that I was not pleased with the sound. Now, at this point in time, I didn't even have the passive radiator on the back yet. I had just been experimenting with the port, and that's when I determined, hey, the port wasn't going to work. And, fortunately, I didn't put myself in a position where I couldn't add the passive radiator. It's easier to just do the port first than to add the passive radiator and the special baffling. And that was that. And it was really a tough lesson. But hey, in the end, it worked out incredibly well. Now this here is just when I set them up and I started listening to them for the first time. Obviously, I don't have a demo here. I'm not going to play it. There's no point in doing it. It just would have sounded really horrible and muffled, and you wouldn't have liked it, believe me. And I could tell right away. And after that, I just ditched it. In fact, my son, Benjamin, was with me, and he was listening to it, and he goes, "Hey, Dad, that doesn't sound right." I mean, even he knew something was wrong with it because my son watches me, do all these experiments and tests and whatnot. So, but it was a hell of a learning experience. So back to the drawing board. So after that, I decided to take the original Forte, open it up, look at this baffle. Now, man, you can Google it all you want. You can't find any information on this baffle, what it's for, what its purpose is, why it's there, if it's there for bracing, if it's there for acoustics. But there's no foam. You know, they have to do all these sophisticated mathematical calculations to account for the volume of space that the drivers up top, like the squawker and the tweeter take up, etc. And this stuff's out of my league. I mean, I'm not qualified to make these decisions. And I just said, I'm going to do it based on the original cabinet. So what I did is I just took measurements, did a drawing with some paper, and just outlined what part was wood, what part was foam. And man, for whatever the reason, for reasons unknown to me, as I stated, I am not an engineer, I would not know. This baffle is like magic. It just makes it work for some reason. And it just tightens up the cabinet, reduces resonances, and I believe that it improves the bass vastly. It's at roughly a 45-degree angle, and I was just really fascinated. I tried to do all kinds of research online to find out what its purpose was. Klipsch doesn't disclose much. They don't seem to show, or nobody seems to know anything about this. It's really fascinating to me. So I went ahead and I ended up rigging my own one together, took the dimensions, drew it out. I'm a very visual person. I try to keep things very simple. So that's pretty much that. So here's the baffle that I made. I ended up doing a little bit differently than the way Klipsch did it, but overall the angle was identically the same. The thickness of wood, the same size piece of foam. And after I took all the foam out of the and believe me, I experimented with foam, without. I tried to experiment with without foam, and like on the top and the bottom, or just on the sides. I did everything imaginable, nothing worked until I did this baffle. And when I did this baffle, it just the bass just came alive. The cabinet, it just sounded phenomenal, and I ended up with a really great result with it. Now, what I've done is I've done tons of demos, but there's so many demos that if I had attached them to this review would have been over a half hour, nearly an hour, and it's just going to be too long. So I'm going to go ahead and do the demos in a second part that's going to come up real shortly, because the demos are all done. I did every speaker pretty much that you see before you, as well as the Magnepan. And I've placed all the box speakers in the same position without any subwoofers whatsoever. The only speaker with subwoofers are these Magnepans. And I have demos. These are earlier demos that I've done that I already had in storage. And all the demos with the Magnepan are going to be with the Rel T0 to kind of even things out, because the LRS Plus is a beautiful speaker, but it just really does need some bass to augment that bottom end a little bit, so it can be more competitive in the bottom end with the other speakers as a complete speaker. And we'll have many demos with that as well. And I think you'll all be very impressed even with the older Forte. It's really a nice speaker. Some of you may even prefer it. Who knows? So let's just see how it turns out next week, and we'll be back at you soon.